We have been talking with Matt Walsh. He's a #1 best-selling author in the LGBTQIAP, however many letters there are, on that category on Amazon, as well as the maker of the groundbreaking new documentary, What is a Woman? There's also this book by the same title. I predict you need to get it now before Amazon and other booksellers refuse to sell it. And that's a distinct possibility, which would be insane, but there's a lot of insane things going on. Now, here's a reminder to our audience. Matt's topic tonight is not for young ears. I want to keep him occupied elsewhere for a couple of minutes as we chat about this important topic. Matt, thanks for sticking around, but I got to tell you, before we get to the next question, we were inspired seeing your film. We thought we'd ask some people this pressing and apparently very difficult question ourselves. What is a woman? So we sent one of our producers to ask the Huckabee audience, what is a woman?
So quick questions. What is a woman?
Ooh, I'm not a biologist.
Somebody that's biologically born with woman parts.
A woman has certain chromosomes.
XX chromosomes.
It's an adult female.
Born a female.
That's us.
She can have babies.
I don't think it's quite possible for a man to have a baby.
And I know a woman when I see one.
You know, Matt, apparently some people don't seem to be able to come with a simple, but our audience generally, they kind of got that. You know, some of this...
It would have been a very short documentary if I'd come here to film, apparently. 5 minutes and we're done.
We sometimes even laugh about some of this stuff because it's so absurd that men are supposed to be able to get pregnant, that we can't say they can't be pregnant. But there's some serious medical issues that are behind all of this. And I think your documentary did such a splendid job in exposing that there's some danger, especially for kids who are being talked into life-changing, irreparable surgical procedures. What's happening out there?
Yeah, and that's the important thing to note is that, and we wanted this to come through the documentary, is that you've got the first part of it that's funny because it's absurd, and absurdity is funny. But then when you get below that layer, you get to some really dark and sinister stuff. In particular, as you know, what they're doing to kids. And this is, we just kind of scratch the surface of that in the documentary, but this is all across the country. They are drugging and mutilating children. You know, in some states, girls as young as 13 are getting double mastectomies. These are physically healthy girls who are having their breasts chopped off because they say that they want to be boys. And of course, you know, what makes this so deranged and disgusting and evil that they're doing this to kids is that if that same 13 or 14 or 15-year-old girl said, I want to get a tattoo, or I want to buy a gun, or I want to go to a rated R movie, I want to buy alcohol, any of that stuff, we would all, the government would say, everybody would say, well, you can't do that. You're too young to make that decision. And yet a child says that supposedly they want to alter their bodies forever. And we've got these so-called gender-affirming doctors who are right there to do that. And there's a lot behind it. One thing we get into in the film is that there's a real profit motive here. You know, there is billions of dollars at stake. And that's part of the story.
For the medical community and the drug companies, where does the money to be made?
Big pharma, the surgeons, therapists, counselors, you know, the doctors who give the hormone pills, the so-called puberty blockers, which they say are temporary and reversible, but they are neither of those things. These are drugs, by the way, in particular, Lupron, we talk about in the film, is a drug that is a chemical castration drug. They give it to sex offenders to chemically castrate them. And we give that now to children, to 12 and 13-year-old children.
12 and 13.
Right. So it's neither temporary nor reversible. A lot of money, though. And here's the thing. So you got a 6-year-old boy who is confused about his gender. Either you could say to the boy, well, you're really a boy, and that's what you are, and that's a wonderful thing, and that'll be it, and that's what you should say, but there's no money in that. So if, on the other hand, you bring him to a therapist, and the therapist says, oh, well, then you're really a girl. Now that child, to the therapists and counselors and doctors and surgeons, is worth millions of dollars through the rest of his life. And I think that is a big part of the story.
That's a crime. It's a crime to do this to little kids that we understand don't have the maturity level to make these decisions. And I think one of the most disturbing thing was the suicide rate among people who go through this process, and it's supposed to make them happy and feel fulfilled. What's the real story behind that?
Well, the real story, as we were told by Scott Nugent, is who I think is the real hero in the film, and is a woman who transitioned to appear like a man, but is, of course, still a woman, and regrets it now, and is now telling the truth about all this stuff. And she tells us in the film that suicidality is highest for transgender-identifying people 10 years after they get the surgery. After, 10 years later, it's the highest. So what this tells us is that, people who are confused about their gender, there's something wrong going on within them, inside their mind. Something very deep has gone wrong. And what we have to do is try to work with them on the mental level, give them counseling so that they can come to accept who they actually are. Because when you are rejecting who you really are, there's despair, a lot of despair that comes with that. And but instead, what our society says now is, well, okay, we're going to affirm the delusion and then try to conform your body to fit your deluded sense of yourself. It's just completely backwards.
And so many teenagers are struggling with their identity anyway. I mean, this has been happening forever. It's part of puberty, part of growing up. And to cater to these children and then to mutilate them, which is, there's no other way to describe it. These kids are being surgically and chemically mutilated. I just can't imagine that people think this is a great idea.
I think lots of people don't realize that it's happening. And that's another thing we wanted to come out in the documentary. And I hear from people every day who tell me that I had no idea this was actually happening. Yeah. And it is. I mean, there are things that, I thought I was pretty plugged into this issue and I knew a lot about it, but I didn't know that girls even as young as 15 were getting double mastectomies. I had no idea that was happening, that was legal. It is happening. It's happening to thousands of girls all across this country every year. So I think that's part of it. People just don't know that it's happening. But if they're made aware, then any decent person will be absolutely opposed to it.
Matt, thank you very much for being with us. We have been enlightened for sure. You need to see this film. It is available exclusively at the Daily Wire. We have a direct link to it at Huckabee.tv because I want you to link to the Daily Wire and with Matt. Both you can do from the website. This is the book. The film is also available at the Daily Wire.